All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, we pray you and your families are well. Such an honor to have you all with us. Thank you so much for joining we can say our first session today, actually. Last session was an introduction session, and today we're going to start the readings and the reflections with Dr. Yusuf Jha. So we're very delighted to have you all with us. I hope you guys are now understanding the system. So after the session, we'll open up the WhatsApp group for discussions and reflections. And in the meanwhile, if you guys can have your microphones muted at all times, that will be highly appreciated. And if you guys want to ask any question, feel free to use your digital hands, and then Dr. Yusuf or myself will, open up your microphone, inshallah. And throughout the whole session, you can use the Zoom chat as well, dear brothers and sisters, for any questions, reflections, or inquiry, inshallah. So yeah, without any further ado, Dr. Yusuf, the floor is yours. Most welcome. Rounds of digital applause, dear brothers and sisters. So inshallah, we'll enjoy our studies with Dr. Yusuf today, inshallah. Bismillah.
Okay, Bismillah. Alhamdulillah, it's good to be back again, and Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So as usual, I think one of the requests from the previous session was that we start with a grounding meditation. Just checking my sound is clear. Say Jamaluddin, it's clear?
Your sound is amazing, mashallah.
Okay,
Jazakallah.
Alhamdulillah. So feet on the ground, spine upright, chest in an expansive position. And this is just a case of just grounding us, just making sure we're present. So we're going to take some deep breaths, what they call diaphragmatic breaths, which are from the bottom of the belly, and you're breathing all the way up. No efforting, whatever pace or it feels comfortable and natural, but just breathe all the way up till the point of the throat, and just hold it. Just going to hold it for like 1, 2, to count of 2, and then just breathe out again through the nose without efforting, in a way that the exhalation is longer than the inhalation, and then we're going to return back to the diaphragmatic breaths inhalation. So we're going to do 3 rounds of this, and then we'll just check in and see how everyone's feeling. So, Bismillah. You're breathing out, just fully breathing out any agitation, any sense of tension. I'm going to take one last big, deep breath. We just feel our senses quietening, our attention becoming more still. Then from this place of attention, we're going to make our intentions. And one of the big intentions we make is for real knowledge. All real knowledge is the knowledge of disclosure. Something that comes under the fabric of La ilaha illallah by removing falsity and bringing about truth. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa warzuqna ittiba'a. Oh Allah, show us the truth as the truth and give us the ability to follow through what it's asking us to do. وَأَرِنَا الْبَاطِلَ بَاطِلًا وَارْزُقْنَا اجْتِنَابًا. Show us falsehood as falsehood and give us the ability to abstain from what has been shown to us as false. So we ask this disclosure of not true knowledge. We ask that we be people of benefit, so we can benefit ourselves first and benefit others. That we be people of service, service to ourselves first and service to others. That we be people connected to the inward and the outward of Islam, the outward sources of the Quran and the Sunnah, and the ilm realities, which are the hearts of those who've inherited these knowledges in an unbroken chain from generation to generation to generation, all the way back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we ask that we be people who seek all of this ابتغاء لوجه الله مرضاته, purely and utterly for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we're going to make this broad intentions and any other sincere intentions that you may have. Inshallah, we're going to make those intentions in a moment of silence. So we'll just go into silence for about a minute. فاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الرحمن الرحيم. مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. So we're going to continue our exploration for setting the foundation for the reading of the Hikam of Ibn Ata'illah. And one of the things we wanted to say was because this course will be recorded online, we're going to pay a little bit of attention to how we set the foundation. So last class was an introductory class, but it allowed us to discuss basically what we mean by the title of this course, which is Psychology of Suluk, and specifically a brief introduction to the format in terms of the nature of the text of the Hikam of Ibn Ata'illah, which is a series of aphorisms followed by rasail, letters, culminating in a munajat, a colloquy. And as I mentioned in the previous class, in today's class, we're going to take a deeper look at the meaning of hikmah. And we're going to do this, and in the classes after this, we're going to go into the biographies of the major figures that make up the hikam, namely Abu Hassan al-Shadili, Abu Abbas al-Musi, and Ibn Ata'illah al-Skandari, who was the author. So today's class, we're going to be discussing the deeper meaning of hikmah. And I did recommend there'll be a bit more, as we're kind of laying the foundation, there is a kind of quasi-academic side to how we're approaching this. So I did give some people in the WhatsApp group some reading material, and I recommended a book called The Prophetic Niche in the Virtuous City, The Concept of Hikmah in Early Islamic Thought. And that book was authored by someone who perhaps aptly is named Hikmat Yaman. And what that book does is it explores the trajectory of the meaning of the word hikmah. And it challenges a kind of simplistic idea that usually foreign Orientalists posit, that the word hikmah was just extrapolated through foreign influence and entered into early Islamic discourse. And what Hikmat Yaman says is, firstly, there is no definitive proof of that. But there is proof of the contrary, which is that in the earliest Arabic literature of pre and Islamic times, we've already find the use of the word hikmah in a certain capacity. And what he says is that if you look at the earliest meanings, then they're multifaceted. In general, the meaning of the word is mana'a, to restrain, but in a way that is mana'a lil islah, i.e., to be prevented or restrained for the sake of good. That's why you find phrases such as hakamat ad-daba, the riding animal was restrained. And another two derivative meanings of hikmah then became atqana, which means to perfect, and ahkama, which means to judge. So one of the big figures who's actually found in early pre-Islamic literature as well, and was someone who then was, subhanAllah, mentioned in the Quran itself, is Luqman al-Hakim. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Luqman, He says, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةَ أَنْ أَشْكُرْ لِلَّهِ وَمَنْ يَشْكُرْ فَإِنَّمَا يَشْكُرُ لِنَفْسِهِ وَمَنْ كَفَرَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ حَمِيدٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and we'd certainly given Luqman hikmah, saying, be grateful to Allah. And whoever is grateful for the benefit of himself. And whoever denies his favor, then indeed Allah is free of need and is praiseworthy. And even in these meanings, you can see that Allah is saying Luqman has been given hikmah. And from this element of hikmah is a nature of gratitude. But not just any gratitude, because a gratitude that returns back to the very essence of who you are. فَإِنَّمَا يَشْكُرُ لِنَفْسِهِ. You're only giving gratitude to the benefit of who you really are. وَمَنْ كَفَرَ, and this type of shukr is the opposite of kufr. It's not just any shukr, it's an ontological shukr. Because if a person doesn't have this shukr, then they're in a state of kufr, which means a negation of the very nature of who they are. Because this is a shukr of the nature of existence itself, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ كَفَرَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ حَمِيدٌ. Because someone who's in this state, then Allah is ghaniyun and He's Hamid. And one of the ways you can often know that what's being implied as a meaning then, because if kufr entails that Allah is to be known as Ghaniyun Hamid, then shukr entails that the abd know that he is the one who is faqir, who needs Allah's ghina. And he is the one who recognizes Alhamdulillah, all praise is due to Allah. There is no hamd for the ego. So one of the dimensions of shukr is to actualize faqr, to actualize your neediness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as the Quran says, إِن يَكُونُ فُقَرَاء, if you can truly actualize your neediness, يُغْنِهِمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ, then He will free you from need, from all besides, from His bounty. So this type of element of hikmah is the hikmah of Luqman, which is the realization of an ontological reality of who we are. And then we also find in some of the earliest hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is saying, Al-kalimatul hikmah, dalatul mu'min, fahaythu wajadaha, fahuwa haqq biha. That a word of hikmah is the lost property of the believer. So wheresoever he finds it, he's more worthy of it. This is a pointer to that hikmah, that ontological sense of wisdom. And one of the most powerful verses that the ulama often use, and it's actually used in a lot of the commentaries on the Hikmah of Ibn Ata'illah, is this verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُؤْتِي الْحِكْمَةَ مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَمَنْ يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا وَمَا يَذَّكَّرُ إِلَّا الْأَلْبَابِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He gives hikmah to whomsoever He wills. And whoever has been given hikmah has indeed been given khayran kathira. And this is not being able to being expressed in English, because often they say much good. But the indefinite nature of khayran means an absolute immeasurable proportion of goodness. And no one is able to really get to the comprehension of dhikr, of true remembrance, dhikr means a remembrance of what you know, except ulul albab, the people of inner cause, the people of the most innermost hearts. So this type of hikmah is a hikmah that can only be grasped by those who really realized who they really are from the most innermost parts. And it's an unfathomable, immeasurable goodness. And this hikmah is ultimately a gift. يعني يؤتي الحكمة من يشاء. It's a gift of grace from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the earliest exegetes of the Quran, such as Ibn Abbas, who is the mufassir of the Quran by the shahada of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the greatest interpreters of the Quran, says the hikmah here is the most discerning understanding, fahm al-daqiq. And without this, a person is unable to differentiate between revelation itself, the halal and the haram, or the metaphorical and the literal. So it's the most discerning understanding that helps you arrive at truth. Hassan Basri, also one from the earliest interpreters of the Quran, said that this hikmah and this ayah is the most moral scrupulousness, wara', and the ultimate understanding that's given by Allah, fahm. Jafar as-Sadiq, one of the greatest, the earliest people who also commented on this verse, says that here hikmah is like an active epistemological notion. In other words, if you have hikmah, then it allows your qalb to really understand, ya'qil, to really listen, yasma', and to see, yubsir, because there is a seeing of the heart. In fact, the Quran says it's not the eyes that go blind, it's the hearts within the chest. And it's almost like Sayyidina Jafar as-Sadiq is saying, this is the hikmah dimension. Another great early figure in Islam, Sahl ibn Abdullah Tustari, in interpreting the same verse that I just read, says the hikmah that's been given, that's being applied as a gift, is ijma' al-ulum, the summation of all the sciences, which are firmly rooted in the way of the Prophet ﷺ. And he said the Rasmal, the capital of hikmah, is of three types. First is the ability to train yourself in a way of abstaining from that which is undesirable, the makruhat. And then is emptying the heart of the love for that which is ephemeral, the shahawat. And then watching over the heart as a form of mindfulness, muraqabah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with regards to the khatirat, the thoughts, khatirat. And then this results in correct action. So he was delineating ways of reforming yourself so that you can be correct. Abu Talib al-Makki also in understanding this verse in his book, Qut al-Qulub, lists 14 aspects of such hikmah. And he says most of these aspects that he lists reflect a form of discerning knowledge with regards to firasa, perspicacity, intellection, aql, comprehension, fiqh, moral scrupulousness, wara', correctness in speech, action and will, irada. So all of these things are kind of a way, once again, to arrive at sa'ada, arrive at felicity with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another great scholar, Abu Abdurrahman as-Sulami, in his commentary on this verse, says hikmah is here the God-given knowledge, ilm al-dunni, spiritual illusion, ishara, spiritual witnessing, ishhad, and a distinguishing light, nur al-mufarriq, which represents an indicator, a mushira of divine grace, fadl. And he interprets this as being a type of light by which you distinguish, nur al-fatana. And this is ultimately all so that one can attain unto, he says, ma'arifah, the attainment of gnosis, which is the epistemological outcome of hikmah. And this is a mawhibah, because Allah says He's the one who gives it. So this is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by which He illuminates the hearts of His servants. Another great early spiritual adept of Islam, Abdul Karim al-Qushayri, who wrote the book Risala al-Qushayriya, in his same interpretation of this verse, says hikmah is shuhud al-haq, the witnessing of the real, and the correctness of action in all affairs, sawab al-umur, wherein one is never on the authority of their egoic caprice, their hawa. So we can kind of get a flavor now of what this meaning hikmah means, what the meaning of hikmah is to a lot of the early spiritual leaders of Islam. And if we were to look at it even from a purely lexicographical position, just a linguistic position, then amongst the foremost philologists of the post-classical era, Islamic era, was Al-Murtada al-Zabidi. And he defined hikmah as being al-ilmu bihaqa'iq al-ashya'i ala ma hiya alayhi wal-amalu bimuqtadaha. That hikmah is knowledge of the true nature of things in regards to what they are really upon, and action in accordance with what that requires of you. Similarly, another great linguist who is a scholar in many other ways, Raghib al-Isfahani, said that the word hikmah was the attainment of that which is true by the use of a true intellect and knowledge. أي إصابة الحق بالعلم والعقل. So now that you understand this broad definition of hikmah from some of the earliest spiritual luminaries of Islam, and also in a very linguistic sense, we can understand how this word then took on different streams within Islamic civilization. This is very important because sometimes we come across the word hikmah in the context of, as many of you may be familiar with, in the analogy or in the context of Islamic tib, medicine. Some of you may know Hakim Archuleta, for example, and you may know several Hakims. Now, that use of hikmah applying to tib is one stream of how the word hikmah came to be known. And you can see why it's being applied this way, because here the practitioner of Islamic tib is responding to what he deems to be the realities of the human self, whether it be in the way a lot of Islamic tib appropriated Galenic or ancient Greek medicine in the role of the four humors and the corresponding capacities, and in the interplay of the opposites. So the sensorial properties of hot, cold, wet, and dry being used as a heuristic for understanding balance and imbalance in the body. That's a type of hikmah, because they're trying to use this knowledge in a way that is synthesizing true health. And that's why the Hakim is also someone who's ultimately using this in actualizing what is real well-being at the level of the soul. And so even within Islamic tib, there's an understanding that the purificatory framework requires removal of toxicity, tahliya, before you bring about healing, tahliya. And it was exactly that same paradigm that's used by the spiritual healers. So Imam Ghazali in his Ihya Ulumuddin, towards the end, his last two sections are, right, the removal of the muhlikat, these destructive vices that bring about toxicity. And after that, you have the adornment of the munjiyat, the adornment of the salvific virtues that bring about healing. So this is a type of hikmah, but it doesn't become just Islamic tib. That's an appropriation of one stream of the word hikmah. Similarly, those of you who are familiar with how philosophy entered into the Muslim world, philosophy literally meaning the philos of Sophia, the love of wisdom, amongst the earliest translators of Greek philosophical work in the Muslim Ummah, such as Abu al-Hasan al-Amiri, who wrote a book, Al-Amad al-Abad, in which he attempted to justify or appropriate how we could understand what's Greek philosophy. Just as a sidetrack, he was a student of Abu Zayd al-Balkhi, who some of you may know of. There's been a lot of work done of how he was one of the early pioneers of quote unquote Islamic psychology, or a form of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. But Abu Yusuf al-Balkhi himself was a student of Abu Zayd al-Balkhi himself was a student of Abu Yusuf Ishaq al-Kindi, who's known as one of the first major Islamic philosophers. He's known as the Hakim al-Arab, and he himself was a teacher at something called Bayt al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. So you can see hikmah being used there. And in Al-Amiri's conception of how Muslims can appropriate this Greek heritage of philosophy, it was very interesting, because he posited 5 Greek philosophers and he tried to bring a sanad all the way back to Luqman al-Hakim. So he said that Empedocles used to keep the company of Luqman, and he learned from him hikmah. And through him came Pythagoras. And from Pythagoras came Socrates. And from Socrates came Plato. And from Plato came Aristotle. And he said all 5 of these people, Empedocles, Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, are people who can be called hukama, these people of wisdom or people of hikmah. And he himself said he was reluctant to attribute hikmah to someone like Galen because he said he was just a tabib. So unlike the idea of saying Islamic tib, people who practice tib are hakims, he said if it's only tib, if it's only Islamic medicine, and there isn't, or there's only some type of medicine, and there isn't a corresponding metaphysics or understanding of selfhood, then that person is not a hakim, he's a tabib. And what's very interesting, because they saw hakim as being an honorific, his own teacher, Abu Zayd al-Balkhi, we just mentioned, who's very relevant to us from an Islamic psychology perspective, would humbly, he used to, Al-Amiri says that Abu Zayd al-Balkhi would never call himself a hakim, which is probably from his humility. He said he would portray himself as an imperfect person who's not worthy of such a respectful description. And in fact, he would reference al-Balkhi as saying that one had to contemplate deeply on the nature of selfhood and the meaning of this world before they could really come to acquire hikmah. And Al-Amri is kind of saying that this was from his humility because even his teacher Al-Kindi would never call himself Hakim. So the understanding being that they were really they were Hakims, but they were too humble to call themselves that. So now this is an interesting point now, because we all know the contribution of Abu Zayd al-Balkhi to Islamic psychology. And now one of his main students, Al-Amiri, is saying that, even he never called himself a Hakim, but implicitly he's saying because he was a Hakim. One of my teachers, Sheikh Muhammad Haider al-Jilani, he was once speaking and we were discussing actually Islamic psychology. And he literally said, to the degree that it's taking from hikmah, it will really be beneficial. Because we can call la mushaha fil istalahat. We can call Islamic psychology anything. We call Islamic psychology, and today someone's Islamicizing this or Islamicizing that or Islamicizing this, and that's happened in a whole host of affairs. And the word Islamic can be juxtaposed to anything. You can have the Islamic Big Mac or the Islamic bank, or so you've got Islamic tourism, and now you've got Islamic psychology. And it wasn't so long ago, if we even remember how Professor Malik, when his early struggles to try and introduce this course, people would say, well, we can make Freud Islamic. That people were keen to, because they were so colonized and so almost enamored by whatever the dominant discourse was. So psychoanalysis of Freud became the main thing. So it was somehow, how do we fit Freud into the Islamic psychology? And my teacher, Sayyid Jilani, said, to the degree that it's taking from hikmah, i.e. Islamic psychology, to that degree it will be beneficial. But to the degree it's not, because it can take from many things. Because a person in his understanding of what Islamic psychology is could just extrapolate any meanings and we're all in some ways products of meaning, and we're all living in a global world of sometimes meaning imposed upon us. And there are many things sometimes which are posited as dominant theories or even forms of psychology that are actually the very opposite of what it means to be a holistic human being. But somebody in their delusion could try and Islamicize that. So he said, to that degree, it's not beneficial. And so the ibra, what is to be taken into account, is not the name, it's the reality. What is it we're drawing upon? So this was, one of my teachers, using this elevated meaning of hikmah. And here you've got Abu Zayd al-Balkhi, who's also kind of taking that same paradigm and saying, this is what we're really trying to do. And of course, the discussion of how philosophy entered the Muslim world doesn't just end with these 5 figures, because as we know, there were other figures who came after that, Al-Farabi, and Imam Ghazali kind of took on a very reformist position, and he wrote the book Maqasid al-Falasifa, and then wrote the book Tahafut al-Falasifa, the incoherence of the philosophers, to reveal the inconsistencies. And in many ways, this is sometimes posited as the death blow. And yet some Orientalists say, well, Imam Ghazali did that, and yet he was incorporating some of the understandings of Ibn Sina. And it was neither. It was a systematic filtering and negating of those elements of Greek thought that was entering into the Muslim discourse that was at odds with Islam and principles of revelation. But otherwise, some of the frameworks and discourse of that was actually incorporated in much of then what to become the Kalam tradition, the tradition of rational theology. And you could see something like the figure of Fakhruddin Arazi, who would then rewrite this in a way that it eventually becomes a big part of the madrasa tradition and the madrasa curriculum. So I'd advise some of you to read a paper written by Sheikh Hamza Karamali called The Madrasa Curriculum in Context. And he focuses on the Ottoman madrasa curriculum, specifically as articulated by someone like Taj Kubrizada in his Miftah as-Sa'ada, Misbah as-Siyada. And in that you can see how even this Aristotelian sense of dividing hikmah, right, or this knowledge of this wisdom into al-ilmiya, which is a theoretical, or a amaliya, a practical science, ends up becoming a part of the Islamic tradition. So you have hikmah al-ilmiya, which is like you have like a metaphysics incorporated, and then you have ilm al-tabi'i, which is natural sciences, and you have ilm al-riyadat, which would be considered that type of mathematics. And this all then is kind of the nazariya side. And then you have the hikmah al-amaliya side, which has in it ilm al-akhlaq, ethics, and then there's ilm al-tadbir al-manzil, which is household administration. This could be considered classical form of economics. And then you have ilm al-siyasa, which is governance. And all of this is actually part of the hikmah tradition because it's using words like hikmah in it. So, and then you have another use stream of this word hikmah, which could be called a combination of this kind of philosophical discourse, and still characterized very much by Ibn Sina, with a discourse of spiritual gnosis or unveiling or experience. And this could be called a theosophy. And one of the initial maybe commentators on that would be someone like Hakim at-Tirmidhi, literally called Hakim at-Tirmidhi. And then you have someone called Shihab ad-Din as-Suhrawardi, not to be confused with Shihab ad-Din Umar as-Suhrawardi, who is the author of Awarif al-Ma'arif. Shihab ad-Din Yahya as-Suhrawardi was someone who devised a theosophical system called Hikmat al-Ishraq, the hikmah of illumination. And in that, there's an idea of tashkik al-wujud, which is what are the gradations? And the word tashkik comes from shakka, which means you're seeing almost degrees and is this really real? Is this really real? So shak means doubt. And so what is really real? There's gradations of reality. And this is what he called hikmatul ishraq. And then you had someone like Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, who also, even though he had a very reformative, spiritual kind of foundational work in Ihya al-Din, he had also theosophical work in his book Mishkat al-Anwar, the niche of lights. And then you also had people like Ibn al-Arabi, al-Hatimi, and his whole school, the Akbarian school, people like Sadruddin al-Punawi, Mu'ayyaddin al-Jandi, Sa'id al-Farghani, Abdul Razak al-Shani, Mullah Shamsuddin al-Fanari. All of these people become very big people in forming this kind of school, which becomes a big part of Muslim thought across the East and West. And you find this reflection in different scholars. From the Indian subcontinent, Shah Wali Dahlavi, and in Iran, you'd have people like Sadruddin al-Shirazi, also known as Mullah Sadra. All of this is also a stream of hikmah. Now, I'm just going to crystallize this for the purpose, and then we'll pause for question answers. So now how is this all relevant to specifically us reading the Hikam of Ibn Ata'illah? Well, a book written by someone called Dr. Ayub Palmer called and he's a lecturer at the University of Kentucky. He's a beautiful brother, converted to Islam. Oh, he's not. He's actually born Muslim with two parents who converted to Islam. And he is someone who I'm not sure if he still remember me, but I remember seeing him many years ago, and he had a really big impact on me. And he gave me a shawl that I ended up doing my one and only Hajj with. Just a little side note. And He wrote this book called The Social and Theoretical Dimensions of Sainthood in Early Islam, Al-Tirmidhi's Nosology, and the Foundations of Sufi Social Practice. And in that book, he also explores this concept of hikmah, but specifically in the Theosophy of Hakim al-Tirmidhi. And he demonstrates how the metaphysical foundations laid by him became the foundations for many Sufis thereafter, and specifically for the Shadhiliya, of whom we're going to be covering in the nature of Ibn Ta'ala. So what he says is that if you look at Hakim al-Tirmidhi, he builds upon also in a kind of a way that's connected. He builds upon Al-Harith al-Muhasibi. Al-Harith al-Muhasibi had this idea of the embodies of hikmah, the hukama, being as akin to sowers of seeds, wherein the seeds resemble wise words that sprout knowledges of divine realization. So the idea is there's great realization. And Imam Junaid, Abu Qasim Junaid, lays the foundations of what Ayub Palmer calls the great mystical synthesis of that century. And what that was that he said that the higher station above the intellect is the use of hikmah to arrive at fana, the annihilation of the egoic sense of oneself, and to abide in baqa, the subsistence that you are through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is from the ayah in Surah Al-Rahman, كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام, that everything on the earth will come to annihilation, or anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala come to annihilation. ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام. And what remains is the countenance of your Lord. أي يبقى بقاء. So he said this is the goal of the spiritual path, this fana that leads to baqa. And this is the role of hikmah. And it was in the specific use of hikmah as a means to attain unto fana, and eventually subsistence, baqa, that Junaid assigned hikmah the role of the interior knowledge that is required to traverse such a path, which he called the tariqah. And this is side by side with the outward knowledge, the ilm. So the hakim is superior to the one who only has outward knowledge, and the outward knowledge is the one who's alim. But the hakim is the one who has the outward with the inward. And this goes back to some of the discussions we had in the previous class, that we don't just have the outward, we're asking for an outward with the inward. And it is that inward coupled with the outward that allows one to attain unto the states of fana and baqa. And in his letters, the Rasail of Imam Junaid, he states a dialogue between a scholar of exoteric knowledge, an alim, and a scholar of esoteric knowledge, the hakim. And the hakim brings the alim to tears, which eventually, he says, facilitates the dawn of the sun of hikmah, Shamsul Hikmah, and the attainment of the limpidity of its light. So now here, Imam Junaid is seeing the hakim, or the wisdom of hikmah, as being a type of light facilitation. And that's why he says in one of his letters, he says, know that the articulants, the articulators of hikmah, don't speak except through permission. But when they do, great benefit descends upon those who are given to hear or benefit from those words. And so this hikmah is being given, he deems it analogous to a flowing stream, a jariyah of light, of nur. And he says the nature of this hikmah is it is illuminatory. Its role is to create light in the hearts of those who listen and pour over their souls, so that it awakens them to the realities ultimately of fana wa baqa, the realities of annihilation of that. He said, yafna man lam yakun, the annihilation of the false ego, that which we take ourselves to be, that is independent. وَيَبْقَى مَنْ لَمْ يَزَلْ, and the subsistence of that which is always there, which is that we are through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we go to the nafs that is ammaratun bisu. We go from the nafs that is ammaratun bisu, which sees itself as mustaghna, as independent of Allah, and we arrive at the nafs radiyatun mardiyya, that is content and pleased and well pleasing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because it's entered into his Jannah, right? Enter into the Jannah as the ibadi. So this entering to Jannah as Allah's slaves is true ibad, means that they're seeing Allah's rububiyyah, that they're witnessing Allah's rububiyyah. And this Jannah is not the Jannah just of the Zakharif, the Jannah of the next life, but the Jannah of the Ma'arif, the Jannah of Gnosis. And so Hakim at-Tirmidhi builds on this discourse of Fana and Baqa, and he basically says that the people of knowledge, the ulama, can ultimately divide it into three categories. The first are the scholars of sacred law and exoteric knowledge. And so they understand the outward. And these are ulama bi umurillah. These are the scholars of the outward affairs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But now it's in the second and third categories that hikmah is being used. And the hikmah in the second category is the inward knowledge. So these are the ulama who are able to discern between the opposites. And these are the ulama of the inward commandments. Al-ulama bi tadbirillah. These are the ulama of the inward commandments. And then they're finally the ulama billah, the scholars through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is those two categories that are now the domain of hikmah. And in fact, the true wilaya, sainthood, is to attain unto this arrival at this maqam of what Ayub Palmer says is the maqam of fardaniya, singularity or non-duality, whereby the wali goes beyond the dualities of this world. And that's the role of hikmah, to take you on this path so you go beyond the duality of the world and arrive at fardaniya, an absolute singularity that is no longer dualistic. And this is why Hakim at-Tirmidhi focuses a lot on the Prophet ﷺ being siraj and munira, like an illuminating lamp, because he says hikmah is very much light knowledge. Hikmah is not book knowledge. Hikmah is not text. Hikmah is not, I've seen this, but hikmah is light knowledge. And it is this light knowledge which has degrees, and the highest being hikmat al-hikmah, or the hikmat al-ulya, the wisdom of wisdoms, where a person interplays between degrees and degrees of light, becomes more and more concentrated. And that's one of the secrets, he said, of the verses of light, because it's all reflections of light. So hikmah is the reverse journey into the more and more concentrated degrees of light, whereby one sees dhulma as being the absence of light, darkness as being the absence of light. And so the more one gets this light, the more one gets spiritual understanding. And we see this in our tradition. You know, Imam Shafi says to Waqi'i, he complains of the Surah Hifdi that he can't memorize. And then Waqi'i says, leave ma'asi, leave sins, because al-ilmu nur, light, knowledge is a light, and the knowledge of Allah is not given to asi, not given to the one who's given to sins. So this knowledge, this light-based knowledge, which is a conduit for a person to go closer and closer to the reality of who he is a knowledge that cannot be admixed with the turbidity of an attraction, of an attachment to anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is the light of wilaya. This is the light where a person enters unto the sainthood of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wherein the heart of the wali becomes the conduit also for this light to enter this world. And the reason why I'm focusing on Hakim at-Tirmidhi and his understanding of hikmah as being a light knowledge is because prior to him, light was sometimes given as a motive of knowledge, but was not placed at the very center of how such knowledge is attained. And through him, this spiritual topography starts being given of how hikmah is different to ilm, just in and of itself. And so the evidence that the Shadhilis were building on this tradition is that Abu Hassan al-Shadhili, who was the grand sheikh of Ibn Ata'illah, he didn't leave many books, but he left ahzab, he left litanies. And in his great litany, Hizb al-Kabir or Hizb al-Bar, we find him using the term hikmat al-hikmah, which is terminology that was previously used by Hakim at-Tirmidhi. And this is the knowledge that he was saying, the highest degree of this knowledge. And we also find that in the book Lata'if al-Minan, which is a book written by Ibn Ata'illah, the same author of the Hikam, he details what was happening in Abu Hassan Shadli's circles. And the book that he says they used to read was Khatm al-Walaya, which is Hakim at-Tirmidhi's book, called The Seal of Friendship, of Wilaya, this special friendship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then if you also look at Ibn Ta'ila in Lataif al-Minan, he's in his entire schematic of how wilaya works, sainthood works, it's completely that of Hakim al-Tirmidhi. And then even in his terminology of the awliya, it says, as the bearers of Allah's secrets and the ma'adin of the light of the knowledge of Allah. This is exact terminology of Hakim al-Tirmidhi. Amongst the mashayikh of the initiatic chain that Ibn Ta'ala lists, it is only Hakim al-Tirmidhi that he lists by name. When he provides 5 ahadith on wilaya, they're all from at-Tirmidhi. He has 2 direct quotes from him, and amongst them is the hadith that he narrates that my community is like rain, in that one does not know if its first part is best or its last. And it's almost as if a demonstration. Ayub Palmer argues that Ibn Ta'ila was claiming to be an adherent to the continuation of what at-Tirmidhi's thesis, that there is a continuation of guidance in the form of this light-based knowledge of wilaya that passes from sheikh to sheikh to sheikh to sheikh, and the spiritual wayfaring, the suluk that we find in the Shadiliya are intended for this regards. So Ayub Palmer says that the structure of Ibn Ta'ila's Hikam takes inspiration, it appears from at-Tirmidhi, because he'll use certain points, he'll use light, he'll use thing, and the gradation of the Hikam as well is taking an understanding of the scheme of Hakim at-Tirmidhi. And so I think we'll end here. I think this is why I wanted to focus on this, so that we have a deeper understanding of what Hikmah means. I think we'll end and open up for Q&A in about the 10 minutes that we've got left.
Barakallahu fikum, Shaykhna. Thank you so much, Dr. Yusuf, for this great session, giving us some holistic understanding, grounded understanding of Hikmah indeed. Brothers and sisters, if you want to ask any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. Just raise your digital hands. We have about 10 minutes. You can also use the Zoom chat, inshallah. Everybody's contemplating, I think, Dr. Yusuf. MashaAllah. Thorough presentation. So Brother Bilal is writing in the chat, Dr. Yusuf, what's available of light for non-Muslims? What's the share of hikmah?
Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he gives his hikmah to whom he wills. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to guide someone, then he doesn't make that person ignorant. So only when a person has light, he sees light. And so when we draw these categories and we say non-Muslims, Muslims, what we really need to understand is where is light and where is darkness. And many a time, a person's heart can have a degree of light. So when the light is shown to them, they see light. And another person, quote unquote, could be surrounded by light, but they don't see light because they're caught up in identities. If you take light to be what he means here, light-based knowledge, then it has to take you somewhere. It has to be a knowledge that's transcending and including this world, including in self. You're seeing the interplay of this world, but then you're simultaneously seeing the fardaniya, the oneness of Allah. So that's why Ayub Palmer calls it a non-dual knowledge. Bilal?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum, brother. Thank you really so much. This is very interesting and very beautiful and meaningful for me. I asked that question partially because I've been working in the social impact space, the idea of people working on businesses or nonprofits to make a positive change in the world. And there's these quotes that go, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come to life and do that, because the world needs that which needs people who have come alive. And I find these things very inspirational, and I'm wanting to help people because I feel like people can connect with a moment of meaning in their hearts and a memory of a time when they've come alive. And I believe personally from my own subjective experience that that experience is often connected with moments of beauty and meaning and wonder and truth and beauty and undeniable divine qualities. Let's just call it like that. Don't need to translate so much more. And I feel like everyone can have access to this in a state of presence, without the nafs, right? Like let's talk about like, okay, well, how do we access those memories and those moments? And I'm trying to shift my programs, instead of telling people to go do good, is to go find the good inside of you and see what it leads you to do. And I'm wondering if, I don't know if you can reflect on that. How can we connect it with these descriptions of hikmah? Is it something that is possible for me to do in a coaching method? I'm just coaching people on this, like discover what makes you come to life. How can you do more of that in your life, and experiment? See if bringing forth beauty and meaning actually leads you to where you want to go as an experiment. So this is my idea, but I want to make sure it's grounded with truth and reality that I think others that you've described in your talk have experimented with experientially, but they've also had the model of the three revelations, right? The outward science, the inward science, but then the book. And I'm wondering how far can we go with just two, two books? I guess is my question. Yeah.
Well, all three of those revelations are mutually reinforcive. So the idea is every sign you see outward is inward, and then the formal positing of that is the Quran. And so the kana khuluquhu al-Quran, as Aisha radiallahu anha said, his character, but you can say his absolute reality of who he was the Quran. The Quran, all of the ayat of the Quran are in the akwan, or the kawn, the universe, and they're also in you, because you are nuskhat al-akwan. You are a microcosm of this thing. So it's not as if they only have two. I mean, if they were to be literate enough with light, they would arrive at all of the same meanings if they just went inwardly. And that's what I was trying to get at. Um, obviously we have an orthodoxy, and we have a theology, and we have a salvific discourse. This is not what the realm in which I'm speaking here. I'm speaking in that very essential realm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We created man in the best of modes. Whereas the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولِدَ عَلَى فِطْرَةٍ. Every child, everyone born is born on fitrah. So here there's an understanding that the asala, the original nature of everyone, is this light, is this light. But what alienates them from that is the nature of this world. And Islam, in its formal sense, is the way to reattain that light. But that doesn't mean that someone who's not been given to see the formal beauty of Islam, for whatever reason, doesn't have some vestiges of light still in them. And it could also mean that someone who, and we see this all the time in the fatwa department, that someone who might be otherwise in the Muslim world is living in the most dysfunctional way, away from what Islam is intending to point you to from that light. So speak to people in the paradigm of light and darkness, and then it's never one size fits all. So yeah, so if as a prescriptive, if I was to say, how do you speak to people, then yeah, there could be a role for, to align to people in a way that you're speaking to them to see the beauty within. But you try that with every single person, and somebody's going to say, huh? All I see is that. So part of hikmah is also understanding the efficacy of what to say, when to say, because that's also the journey of light and darkness. That some light, you're not going to shine a flashlight on someone who can barely take in any light, and then they're just blinded, right? Some people, try looking at the sun, and all you're going to do is get misty-eyed and be able to see, unable to see anything. So there's a istidad, there's a readiness for light, and that's where gradation comes into it. It was never just darkness and light. There's gradations. There are reality, but it helps to see the essential reality of people as being light-based. And it helps that if you yourself are grounded in light, someone who has light, then you speak from light. And this goes back to how Ibn Ata'illah actually uses things, because he says that these words come out, and upon them is the kiswa, the covering from whence they came forth. So if a heart is full of light, then the words that come out from such a mouth is now carrying a light capacity to impact other people's hearts. And hearts that come out from hearts that are attached to the ephemeral world, then they can come up with the most beautiful, on paper, but the effect of that is the very opposite, because they're springing forth from dark hearts. So this is what he means. Hikmah is a very deep concept here. And it's this understanding of this interplay and this understanding of this gradation in the context of light to arrive at Nur al-Anwar. What is the light behind all lights? What is the light that is the source of all lights? Does that help, Bilal? Okay.
Jazakallah khairan.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brother Bilal, for your great question. Thank you for your great answer, Dr. Yusuf. We're out of time now. I'm noticing we have 1 minute. Shall we take one more question, Dr.
One
Yusuf?
more question just to keep, at least we got two because we had two last class. So let's keep that going. Inshallah.
All right, inshallah, inshallah. So Arwa is writing, what's the most effective way to perform purification with muraqabah of our thoughts?
I'll skip this question because we did say the questions have to be relevant to the direct topic. There is a relevance, but it seems like one of those general relevances. So, you know, well, okay, maybe I could answer. I mean, some element of muraqabah is to first find, I'm not going to say most effective way because I can only speak from my own experience, is that find a position of presence from which you look at your thoughts. So this is now, we're already entering into hikmah territory here, right? What does it mean, presence? One of the beautiful du'as of the Prophet ﷺ is, oh Allah, place light in my heart, light in my seeing, light in my hearing, light on my right, light on my left, light below, light above, light in front, light behind. So it's light all around, and then he ends, وَجَعَلْنِي نُورًا, make me light, make me light, make me light. So if your light is in your seeing, your hearing, you're surrounded in all directions by light, which is unbounded, because he didn't say light only to a certain point on my right. He said light on my right, which is unbounded light on your right, unbounded right, and make me light. And this is a dua that they say he used to make at the time of the Tahajjud, and others say that he used to make this in his sajda. And this was a practice many of the spiritual people used to do in their sajda, the dua of sujood, is that how about we try and engage with some of the meanings of this, and then we observe our thoughts, a muraqabah, from this unbounded light. That's a different muraqabah now. That's not muraqabah from the me, because if you're observing the me from the me, then you're just compounding the me, right? The monkey mind can't observe monkey mind. So you have to find a greater vantage point to observe monkey mind, and observe muraqabah of your thoughts. Because what are you going to be muraqabah from? Well, here's an ishara from the Prophet ﷺ. Find that light vantage point in your heart. Find light, and then from the light, just observe the thoughts, not become the thoughts. Don't let the thoughts pull you into identifying with the thoughts, because that thought is not you. You're the light now. The light, the unbounded light, which can witness the thoughts. Otherwise, if you take yourself to be the thoughts, you're no longer the light. If you take yourself to be the thoughts, you're caught up in the narrative of the thoughts. You're caught up into the past, present, future of the thoughts. You're caught up, and then you can't observe the thoughts. So here's an application of some of what we've been saying, hikmah discourse, to muraqabah. Inshallah.
Jazakallah khairan, Shaykhna, Dr. Yusuf, for your great remarks. There are a couple of other questions. What we will do is we will collect them, inshallah. We will share them with Dr. Yusuf, and hopefully, Dr. Yusuf, whenever you have time, maybe you can send a voice message and we can share it to all the participants,
Inshallah. So one of the things we're doing is, I can't promise all because I don't know how many questions are going to come, but if the questions will be compiled, then for the WhatsApp group, I'll be recording them in a WhatsApp recorded message and they'll be sent there, inshallah. So even if you didn't get them answered here, inshallah, we can rely on Sayyid Jamaluddin and his team to, inshallah, compile them.
Jazakallah khairan, Shaykhna. Dr. Yusuf, thank you so much for giving out of your precious time to allow us to learn from you, inshallah. And inshallah, brothers and sisters, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your great remarks, reflections, and questions. And from the behalf of ISIP, International Students of Islamic Psychology, we thank you, as always, Dr. Yusuf, for always being with us and supporting all of us as your students. And inshallah, we will benefit as we walk in this path of Suluk together, understanding the psychological insights of Suluk. Brothers and sisters, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your questions once more. We will open up the WhatsApp group within 5 minutes for all of your discussions and reflections. And we highly recommend you guys to discuss the content of the talk today so that we can learn from each other through collective knowledge inquiry, inshallah. Without any further ado, Dr. Yusuf, if you would like to end we would love if you can end the session today with a dua, please.
الرحمن اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين وصل على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, bring light into our hearts, light into our hearing, light into our seeing, light before us, light behind us, light on our right, light on our left, light above and light below. Oh Allah, make us light, make us light, make us light, make us discern truth from falsehood. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, help the believers wherever they be, from Masharq al-Magharibi and the east and the west, and help our believing brothers in Philistine in Sham and in Sudan and في كل مكان يا رب العالمين. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, purify our hearts, purify our hearts, Ya Rab, connect us all in love and rahmah to one another, Ya Rabb al-Alameen. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Subhanak rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. ربنا تقبل منا بسر صلاة الفاتحة. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khairan, Shaykhna. Thank you for being with us. Thank you,
وإياكم.
brothers and sisters, for joining us. Thank you, Sister Hiba, Sister Dania, Sister Mediha, Sister Yusra, for coordinating in an excellent way. Thank you for your questions, brothers and sisters. We will try to share all of them to Dr. Yusuf. Thank you, Dr. Yusuf.
Okay, السلام عليكم.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Shaykhna.